Again, my name is Michelle Streeter-Ferrari. I'm director of the University Center for International Education. Today I'm very honored to introduce to you a very dynamic guest, Carl Hobert. He's a clinical instructor at the Boston University School of Education, as well as the founder and executive director of the Axis of Hope Center for International Conflict Management and Prevention. Hobert's research focuses on approaches to increase students' and adults' global IQ. Hobert has developed practices to increase international student enrollment in U.S. universities and schools, and international professionals' employment in U.S. corporations and organizations. Hobert holds a BA in cum laude in French and Political Science from Middlebury College, and an MA in Spanish from Middlebury College, and a Master's of Arts in Law and Diplomacy from Tufts Fletcher's School. His most recent bestseller, Raising Global IQ, Preparing Our Students for a Shrinking Planet, Beacon Press, came out in February of 2013. Please join me in welcoming Carl Hobert to Wright State University.
It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for that kind welcome. I would like to ask you first in this audience to please think about the word listen. As I was explaining to students earlier today, the word listen spelled another way is silent. Spelled a third way is enlist. So I ask you today to listen by remaining silent, and I hope to enlist you into a new way of thinking about what's going on campuses like this around the country, where you've got multiple countries represented, multiple cultures and languages represented, and how those cultures have been created to see students get along and grow well together. May I ask that everyone stand, please, first. Do you notice what you lost when you stood up? You lost your lap. That was a joke. Total Midwest humor. Sorry about that. Now would you take a look at your fingernails, please? Notice how there are some people going like this, others going like this. Think differently about how others look at the world. Now, if you have enough room, would you take a look at the bottom of your foot, please? I'm the father of 3 daughters. They all go like this. I go like that. Think differently about how you look at things. Now, would you please stay standing if you speak more than one language fluently? Yes, English is included. Would you please stay standing if you speak more than 2 languages fluently? More than 3? Would you please identify your country of origin? Isn't it interesting? I give these lectures around the country, and I ask that same question around the country. It is usually foreign students and faculty members and members of staffs who stay standing the longest. One of the things we've got to think about is moving away from lingualism to multilingualism. We also have to think about the whole idea of multiculturalism, which I'll be talking about today. Thank you very much. Grab a seat. I'd like to start off with a quote by one of my favorite persons in the history of actually the world, Albert Einstein. He said, "There has been a quantum leap technologically in our age, but unless there is another quantum leap in human relations, unless we learn to live in a new way, looking differently at one another, it will be Bottom line, a catastrophe. That's Albert Einstein. I know we all respect him. You think about what he says, getting along more effectively, as I speak today. I'd like to look at the first slide. Can anyone tell me what you see there? It's an interesting series of black and white boxes. Do you see anything else when you squint your eyes? Yes. The words bad eyes. Can everyone see it? If you can't, please ask the person next to you how to look at it. Again, thinking differently about how you look at the world. I'll often tell students when I'm dealing with them, squint your eyes and you'll see something differently. I did a lot of research on Wright State before coming here, looking into the true personality and the true history of this institution. I learned several things. One of the most fascinating for me as an international educator is that Wright State is at a crossroads in international education. The university has experienced a growth in international students from 1,000 in 2012 to nearly 2,000 in 2015. I also came to learn that 43% of the students here are from India. Other large populations are here from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, and China, and I could go on. But I think it's a fabulous thing that the college or the university has done to diversify its student body. But obviously, that can also lead, as you all know, to greater tension. This has caused tension with a great amount of cultural, not just linguistic, but cultural misunderstanding and frustrations on the part of faculty, administrators, staff, and students themselves. Well, let me say that I can relate to this. As I told a group earlier today, I'm the father of 3 teenage girls. Leah, the oldest, age 19, we adopted in the Hunan province of China when she was 6 months old. She had been left in a basket on the platform in a train station late at night so that somebody during rush hour would find her the next day. Leah is now 19 years old. She is a sophomore at Wellesley College, just outside of Boston. She is a pre-med student. She had an internship with an Italian female neurosurgeon last summer at Boston Medical Center, and she's heading off in 2 months to Nicaragua to do work medically with orphans. Number 2, Olivia, is 17 years of age. On a second trip to the Hunan province of China, we adopted her. She's now getting ready for college next year and feeling the pressures. Olivia was left in a basket at the bottom of the staircase outside of a 5-story apartment complex in the middle of the summer. Not only was she a victim of malnutrition, but she experienced sunburn over most of her body. She's heading to college next year to become, she hopes, either a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a social worker, working with children in the United States from other countries who are experiencing problems with cultural misunderstanding. And our third daughter, a surprise biologically to us, she is now 13 years of age and is in the 7th grade. Her name is Juliana. Can you imagine going home every night to these 3 daughters? Biologically from 3 different parents, but they are all ours. And as I told a group earlier today, again, thinking about this idea of cultural misunderstanding, gaps, confusion. I was in a CVS pharmacy not long ago buying them shampoo and conditioner in separate bottles, Pantene. And the boy behind the counter, roughly age 17, looked at my 3 daughters and looked at me and said, The youngest one, she really looks like you. Who are the real parents of the other two? Now think about how many times things like that happen on this campus, where people are lacking cultural understanding, are not willing to face differences very effectively, love to speak behind the scenes against other people. My friends, that is a form of racism. Our world, according to my book, Raising Global IQ, is a shrinking world. We have got to get to learn how to come together and coexist more effectively. We have got to break through the shackles of racism. We've got to become multilingual and multicultural, and we've got to do it quickly. Again, our world is shrinking. I learned this. Yes, there are great tensions here, as I said before. Oh, and right next door, and I got an interesting tour last night in the van coming from the airport, is the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, which obviously elicits this huge advocacy program for veterans here on campus, and obviously creates a very, very, very conservative climate in this area. So what you're seeing here, my friends, is a multicultural, multilingual community here, and on the other side of the fence is a very patriotic community. You know what you've got to do? As I say to groups around the world, you have got to confront conflict, and you have got to confront conflict immediately. If you don't, not only could things explode, they could implode completely as people start to speak out against one another, as people start to build walls around one another and build silos that turn into, I hate to say this, but hatred. So if you're thinking about what's going on, you have a large number of foreign students here, as I mentioned before. The other interesting thing I've learned about this university, you've got a large number of domestic students who are here, who are not only first-generation students, but many have jobs off campus. They're trying to balance the academic world with working. Many have never traveled overseas before. So you're facing that domestic issue of conflict. Base, college, or university setting, you're facing that conflict of students who are coming from overseas, able to study overseas, and students who are from here who cannot do that. And we're now faced with this idea of, oh my gosh, what do we do? How do we become a bit more radical and look at this, take this head on, and elicit change? Well, many believe that Wright State University or the U.S. government is sponsoring those students who come from abroad to study here. I'll be the first to tell you that is not the case. We are not trying to raise spies here at this university. Number two, I've noticed that the university has done a fine job of creating programs to connect international students with domestic students. I learned that when I was talking to students earlier today. How students have gotten to know one another, it's neat. I was reminded that it's kind of similar to my daughters when they were growing up and how I would get them play dates with children who were very different from themselves. Well, this is a young adult play date society here, where you are learning to get along very well, day in and day out. But the larger problem, and I'm going to be radical about this because I believe in what I call educational civil disobedience. I'm at Boston University, where Martin Luther King got his doctorate, by the way. The larger challenge is getting the faculty, getting staff, and getting administrators more on board, buying in more effectively to this whole idea of the influx of foreign students and becoming, as I say, more accepting of this globalization of your community. Sometimes I've learned that Boston University, where we've been bringing in foreign students for years, we have now roughly 8% of our undergraduate 12,000 students from foreign countries. I've got colleagues at Boston University who say, Professor Hobert, those students in my class do not speak English well enough. or they don't write well enough, or I just don't think they should be here because they're the types of students that we just shouldn't have. Well, you know what I say to them? You are creating a true world in your classroom where you've got American students and you've got foreign students who are discussing issues right now that are very important. And instead of getting in correction mode and coming down on those students, why don't you hold extra office hours to actually help those students with their assignments? Give them more counseling in terms of how they can deal with your subject matters more effectively. Well, I see that happening here too. You've got growing groups of faculty members and staff who are saying this is just not right. We are bringing in foreign students because of the injection of capital, and it's not a good investment for our college or university. Well, I've got to say, I absolutely and completely disagree with that. Being able to bring large groups of foreign students to this country, to be able to show them how to become chameleons in our culture and with our language is one important step. But the next important step is being able to have students from the United States, including first-generation students, get overseas. One suggestion I'm going to give you, make it a requirement before you graduate to have all students on this campus study overseas. Set up a fund if they need financial aid for that. Number two, you are now doing an incredible job of bringing more faculty members over from other countries. We've done the same thing at Boston University under Bob Brown, our president, who used to be the provost at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Bob knows very well how to bring in faculty members from overseas. But I'm going to make a suggestion that I gave to Bob last year in the middle of our Boston University Capital campaign, set up a fund so more faculty members can go overseas themselves, whether it's for research or simply to go overseas after getting a U.S. passport. That is going to raise the global IQ of faculty members, and it's going to raise their acceptance of students coming from other countries. The other thing I've learned recently is not only that challenge of trying to get people to buy into this whole idea of globalization, of the curriculum, of the student body, of the faculty members, but it's also a process that's led to a 360-degree look at exactly what this college, what this university does. And for the past 2 years, I've learned that it has not been easy to look at all of these different problems from all of these different angles in this 360-degree study. There's been a bit of tension. There's been a bit of friction. I found out that not just from students, but having a meeting with administrators and faculty members over lunch. But think about this tension. Although there is quite a bit of tension, I think there is a solution. If you look at conflict, I work around the world, in this case with North and South Korea. And I'd like you to think about my triangulation theory in terms of the conflict that you see going on campus right now. You create a triangle, and then you identify 6 parties that are involved in the triangle. When I was working with Steve Bosworth, former ambassador to South Korea and an incredible mentor at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy when he was dean there, Steve and I sat down and said, 2 groups at one point in the triangle, you can see the overlap, the United States and South Korea. We are dear friends. We do have differences. The overlap is what we agree on. Look at the group and another part of the triangle, North Korea and China. The third pair in that triangle with billions in investment in North and South Korea, Russia and Japan. And if you think about taking lines and drawing them from those 3 points of the pyramid to the middle, you create a bullseye. And you create 3 different negotiation points in that bullseye. For us, and what we continue to do in North and South Korea, is these 3 issues. Number 1, the bullseye, the most important, security. We are fearing nuclear war in that part of the world. So the top issue, life or death issue, is security. The second one, economic infrastructure. And the third one, governing structure. And you know what's neat? If you get these 6 parties to sit down together, and we've had summit conferences in Vienna and Madrid and Paris and Camp David, if you cannot get these 6 groups to agree on the middle of the bullseye security, you call a timeout and you move on to the second circle. If you cannot decide on the second circle, you move on to the third, and then you revisit the other 2 later. That is a term called BATNA. Please never forget this. BATNA. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Anytime you're getting into a discussion or an argument, you should always think BATNA. Having options in your back pocket so you can move on in your discussions. This is one example of triangulation. Once you get groups into the conflict resolution mode of negotiation, notice how you have each of those 6 groups prepare themselves individually for negotiations. Then you have pre-negotiation team meetings where they start to talk about who the spokesperson will be, who the secretary will be to take notes. You then move on to the different rounds of negotiations, and in each round you don't meet at one large table. You always meet in pairs. So in the first round, as you saw in that triangle, South Korea would meet with the US, North Korea would meet with China, Japan would meet with Russia. And because you've got 6 groups, you've got 5 rounds of negotiations so that each group can meet with every other. So the only way for the US to meet with South Korea, North Korea, China, Japan, and Russia is 5 rounds of negotiations. And everyone else can meet with every other group or every other country. The key is this going to lead to some sort of peaceful settlement? Watch this same theory play out in the Arab-Israeli conflict. Can you imagine having people role play? Quartet, Arab League, Hamas, Fatah, Likud, Benjamin Netanyahu's party, or Labor. And the 3 issues we have people focus on right now, and this is obviously an ongoing issue, is the division of Jerusalem. You know what those 3 issues are? Number 1, security. Number 2, settlement expansion in East Jerusalem or not. Number 3, sovereignty. Who has true sovereignty over Old Jerusalem, including the Wailing Wall, the Mount, Al-Aqsa Mosque, etc.? My colleagues in Israel would say, we have sovereignty over that. You Palestinians, you Muslims, you should be happy with Mecca and Medina, and we'll give you custodianship, but that's all. Do you think that creates problems? What do? We call a timeout and we move to other issues. But do you see the structure here? Triangulation, 3 issues. I move on. Look what we're doing in Syria now. You think Syria is a hot-button issue? We've got the al-Assad government. Russia, my friends, is fighting a proxy war in Syria. Putin is fighting a proxy war in Syria by supporting the Assad regime against the United States, which is, as you can see, supporting Israel. Oh, I mentioned Benjamin Netanyahu before. He was just in Washington, D.C. last week, meeting in the Oval Office, where he was promised almost $4 billion in military assistance because of especially what's going on in Syria. So we, through Israel, are fighting a proxy war versus Russia. And look at the other 2 parties there, Free Syrian Army, as well as the Syrian National Coalition. And one of the things that we've done with this case study on Syria is we have included many other groups who can be present at the negotiations but not sit at the table. And right now, the person who is spearheading this entire effort is an old friend from the state of Massachusetts who used to be our Senator, John Kerry, who is now the Secretary of State, meeting today with the French government in Paris. And this is a huge piece of what John Kerry is talking about with President Hollande of France. As you know, The bombings took place there last Friday. Now, notice why I've introduced this. Here comes your curveball. Can you imagine creating that same triangle where you're looking at the issues that exist here, the conflicts that exist here on campus between international students, domestic students, staff members, faculty members, administrators? I'm just saying this is a possible suggestion. But now I'm going to ask you to please raise your hands and make other suggestions. Number one, you see the 6 groups there that we're trying to get to come together to grapple with issues that are going on here on campus. Cultural, linguistic friction that is going on campus. In and of itself, what I call an academic civil war. Can anyone offer other suggestions for groups that should be at the table here as one of 6 sides? Take a stand. Anyone? I sense the tension. Yes. I'm sorry? Heterosexual, homosexual, white, black. All these different subgroups. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for getting the microphone. Somebody else? Other groups? Yes. Different religious groups. Thank you very much. It's interesting what's happened since Paris in terms of racism on campuses across the country vis-a-vis certain religious groups, isn't it? Others? Yes? Students from India. The majority foreign student population here. Very good. Others? How about this as a question? And I'll be writing up an executive summary for the president of this university after I leave today in terms of next steps to take to defuse the problems that are existing on campus today. How about the 3 issues? I see you speaking up in the back. I like your style. What do you think is one of the issues? He's now turning around. There we go. What do you think one of the issues should be? Lack of cultural awareness. Very good. Somebody else? Anyone? Lack of cultural, yes?
I think the lead programs should be good. They are the ones who hear students.
Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry, can't quite hear you. The something society, you said. Integration? Society. Thank you. One more. Anyone? Sorry? Academic integrity. Downloading information or not and claiming it as one's own. Right. Thank you. Yes? Class issues on campus and the intersection. Yes?
Safety and security on campus.
Safety and security on campus. Thank you. Anybody else? Yes? Cooperation with American students? Thank you. We have one more up here. Would you mind saying this to everybody? Stereotype and bias. All of these could be your core issues after you decide on your 6 groups. And again, remember, I've been talking to a lot of people today. I've gotten my report already being authored. If you look at this and you think about this form of conflict resolution, again, you want to be able to have the different sides, but you don't just want to sit back and argue, oh, there aren't more sides, or there should be more issues. What you want to do, as I said before, similar to what we do between North and South Korea, what we do in the Middle East, what we're now starting to do with Syria, is you have got to start the negotiation project. You've got to get the individual groups to meet, to choose representatives and spokespersons. You've then got to get all groups meeting, and you can't just do it once, sign some sort of a treaty and put it up on the wall and say, this is our agreement between students, faculty, staff, and administrators. You have got to continue round after round after round of negotiations, looking at every single angle like you do a crystal ball. All of the different issues that you're focusing on, you've got to be able to look from multiple angles. And the other thing I haven't told the university I'm going to be doing is once you come up with those 6 sides and those 3 different issues you're going to be discussing, I'm going to author a case study for you. And I'm going to have in that case study 4-page confidential instructions for each of the different 6 roles that you want created. And I will create in that case study with each confidential instruction 4-page how you stand on the 3 core issues that are in the middle of the triangle. So let's say you decide that one group is administrators. I will create the 4-page confidential instructions for administrators, their stance on the 3 issues, and I'll do the same thing for all other 5 sides. And then here is your curveball. When I send you that case study, and I'd be happy to return to run a conflict resolution workshop, if you are an administrator, a top administrator at this university, you will be forced to play the role of a student. If you're a student, you will be forced to play the role of a faculty member or an administrator. You know what the key there is? Walking in the shoes of others. You must learn, like my favorite quarterback in the NFL, Tom Brady. His beautiful place is not far from my office at Boston University. Tom Brady is such a competitive guy. He gets in the brains of every single person on defense the week before he plays them. You've got to do the same thing when you're going into a game like this, which is a very serious game. You have got to be able to walk in the shoes of everybody. Walk in the shoes of every person who is coming to that conflict resolution workshop or conference, so you leave being winners, all of you being winners. And one of the things you learn by playing the role of someone else or walking in the shoes of others, you separate the people from the problem. You focus on the issue, not thinking about yourself and your ego. And you want to walk away with what I call mutual gains. How do you allow the entire community to gain something? Everyone at that table with a ripple effect in positive ways throughout the college community. That's the importance of what I call the intellectual, outward-bound case study approach to conflict resolution. So as you're working on that here as a community, you also want to think about other things to raise the global IQ of the entire community. Number one, not only students who are coming in from overseas, should they be multilingual? Think about it as a requirement that American students must gain proficiency, if not fluency, in at least one language, if not more. I often say that my learning French and Spanish was not enough. I kick myself to this day for saying, why didn't I go on to learn an Eastern language? Arabic, Urdu, Farsi, Punjabi. You know what we call those at the U.S. State Department? Critical languages. If you learn those languages, you should see what's going to happen to your job opportunities when you get out of college. So think about not only multiple language acquisition, number one, but number two, cultural acquisition or fluency, where you're not only learning to get along with students on campus, but you are getting abroad before you graduate also. And when you get abroad, you're developing the ability to become what I call a chameleon. You're learning to fit into other cultures and societies, and you know what's happening to the brain? Smelling new things, tasting, seeing, touching new things. That is creating more effectively than you. So when you and completely different view of the world, and you should see how much more you will appreciate what students from other countries have had to go through coming here. You go through culture shock when you come back. You go through linguistic shock when you come back. And you will now start to come closer and closer together as a community because you've thought outside the box and you've gotten overseas yourself. And remember, as I said before, this should be students, it should be faculty members, and I think we should add staff and administrators to that list as well. Getting overseas as much as possible. And now I'd like to think about the whole idea of looking differently at pictures. What do you see here? Don't you see nature there? Think about a beautiful lake in this region. Think about the trees in the background. Think about the couple standing there, loving couple. Does anyone see something different? Yes. Isn't it interesting that somebody who has learned another language, or two or three or four, and somebody who has learned about other cultures can immediately identify that there is a baby there? Do you see the baby? If you don't, please ask somebody beside you. This is the way to look at the world differently and to think about how we perceive of issues and problems in the world, where you can never say, I'm always right. Again, you've got to be able to walk in the shoes of others to have a different view or different idea of the world and what's going on here every day. And before we go into a question and answer period, I'd like to tell you how important this has been to me in terms of my work. I started at Boston University with an experiment with students like you when I brought my nonprofit organization Axis of Hope to BU. I started teaching students like you about the conflict that exists to this day in the country of Rwanda. I taught students about how former Hutus and Tutsis are still in conflict there to this day, and President Kagame, for whom I do a lot of consulting work in education, is unfortunately in the crosshairs of many people over there. Both former Tutsis he grew up with outside the country who came back in to free the country, they think they should be president. Former Tutsis who survived the genocide inside the country, they think he should not be president because he grew up outside. Former Hutus from outside and inside the country who think he is a member of the minority, not the majority like the Hutus are. Why is he president? So I teach you about this, and I force you to play roles on different sides in that conflict. That's stage one with my case study on Rwanda. Stage two, total surprise for my Boston University students. I have you do a live Skype with President Kagame, so you learn what's going on there to this day and can ask him questions. I also have a live Skype with all of the students I've worked with in Rwanda since the height of the genocide in 1994. And stage three, icing on the cake, gets back to what I've been saying before, getting out into the field. I accept 20 students every summer who come to Rwanda with me. They have already connected with the president. They've already connected with former Hutus and Tutsis. They live in the homes of those former Hutus and Tutsis. And you know what we do every single day? We meet in front of the Sainte Famille Church in the middle of Kigali, the capital. Big open clay lot. A lot of dust in the summertime. We walk in for a moment of silence into that church where over 12,000 people were killed at the height of the genocide in 1994. There are no more stained glass windows in there either because of all the grenades that were thrown in there, so the shrapnel would bounce off the brick walls. After that moment of silence, we walked down the hill, roughly 500 meters away to the Home of Hope orphanage, run by Mother Teresa's protégés, Missions of Charity. When you walk in, you put your backpacks in a small room, and you walk down the hill and you're already hearing the babies cry. These are little orphans who are HIV positive. And you work there every single day for 8 to 9 hours, feeding these little babies, rocking these little babies, playing with them, so they're learning from you and being fed from you, not just physically, but in terms of love. It is a life changer. And imagine sitting on a small bench in front of a crib where you see the slats of the crib and you see 7, 8, maybe 9 babies inside, and you've got 2 metal dishes to either side of yourself, and you are feeding them the porridge. You know what one student last summer said to me? Professor Hobert, these children are the prisoners of poverty. How fair is it that President Kagame, who is so successful in turning that country around, has an orphanage like this right down the hill from Sainte Famille Church, which is right down the hill from Hotel Rwanda, which is right down the hill from President Kagame's White House. And then you know what I do the last night we're there? We all go and have dinner with President and Mrs. Kagame. So you get to talk to the President, you get to talk to the First Lady, her name is Jeanette, and you get to discuss this issue of building a democracy. Has he done it correctly? He'll be the first to say Rome was not built in a day. And then you talk to him about the fact that there are orphans down the hill. He says, do you have homeless in the United States? And then you talk to him about adoption. May we adopt more children from the United States? Bring them to the United States, from Rwanda. And President Kagame would say this: you want to adopt our children? You are so nice, you're so noble. Number one, you will spoil them rotten, and they will never want to come back to this country. And number two, what does that make Rwanda look like? We need other countries to help us out. So not only have you been in the classroom role-playing different sides, not only have you video conferenced with President Kagame, not only have you video conferenced with students over there, your same age, you have gone there, you have lived it, and you've breathed it. And when you come back after that experience, the highs and the lows in what they call the land of 1,000 hills, boy, do you have a different view of human nature, which is not just people over there, but yourself. Yourself. My biggest goal in educating youth and working with other educators around the United States and abroad comes from this man right here. Albert Einstein was a great professor at Princeton University. He was criticized by his colleagues for believing in diversity, multiculturalism, multilingualism. He himself was multilingual and multicultural. He was also criticized by faculty members for actually inviting students over to his apartment, for stopping lectures if students had questions. And he and other faculty members would have conversations about the importance of research versus actually getting out there and getting to know other members of the community. He was a very humble man who went on to win, as you know, the Nobel Prize. You know why he felt guilty on his deathbed, even after winning the Nobel Prize and being such a great educator? Not only did he invent a great energy resource for the world, the positive, he also invented a way to blow up the world. And he would also think about another interesting man in history who invented dynamite and used nitroglycerin to blow up a lot of the world in his construction business. His girlfriend, not his wife, he never got married, his girlfriend said to him on his deathbed, "My Alfred," she called him, "did you invent one of the greatest forms of construction in inventing dynamite for your firm, or destruction?" Well, I would say that there are Russians today who would say, "Albert Einstein, what you invented brought down a plane not far from Israel, in Egyptian territory." Does anybody remember that plane went down? The Sinai Peninsula. That was dynamite, my friends. Do you want that sort of explosion and dynamite on your campus? Or do you want to create multiple groups and walk in the shoes of others so you understand where people are coming from? My single biggest goal in education, when I'm around the dining room table with my daughters, or when I'm speaking to students and faculty members and staff and administrators like you, My single biggest goal, I would like to be able to go to Oslo someday or Stockholm someday to see a former student, somebody I had a little contact with, win a Nobel. Set aside egos in academia. Instead of saying, I really want to win the Nobel, how about saying, I want a former student to win a Nobel? And I'd like to be there someday to see it happen. And this is exactly why I leave you with this. I created Axis of Hope, calling it a revolution in conflict resolution, and you can see how it can be used in the geopolitical setting. And not only do I have case studies on international issues, I have case studies on national issues, so you can role play different sides. How about this one? Immigration reform. Another one? Gun control. Or how about this one, which is a local issue? Bullying in schools. That's used around the country in schools so that children are taught not to bully. You know what I call that, my friends? You start with global case studies and role plays thousands of miles away, and then you get closer to home, gun control, immigration reform, and then you get closer with bullying. I call that glow-nation-ocal. Global, national, local has become glow-nation-ocal. And then you flip-flop that term and think about the service learning you should be doing, making it an important part of your life. Start right in your own backyard. Instead of playing video games all the time and partying, why don't you go out and do some work with poor, innocent public school kids right in this area who may one day become members of gangs. Work with young children here in this area locally. And then think about working nationally. Go to a soup kitchen in Washington, D.C. I could set you up with several there. Or New York City. Or wherever you go instead of just making it a touristy trip. And then think about going to a place like Rwanda or elsewhere around the world. And I encourage this university to set up other service learning trips around the world. Do you see how glow-nation-ocal turns to loc-nation-obal? One is the study, two is the service, and it gets back to oneself. And I am convinced that this is a revolution in conflict resolution. I'm convinced students like you can do it. I'm convinced academic institutions can do it like this. And that's why, to this day, I carry this with me everywhere I go. Everywhere I go. That's a tattoo, and that's hope with a peace sign O. And you notice that the letters are not perfect, because hope is not perfect. But you've got the opportunity in your hand. And thinking about what's existing here in terms of friction, linguistically and culturally on campus, you have got the opportunity immediately to confront this conflict by bringing together students, faculty, administrators, staff, even members of the community right outside who have perhaps created some friction here also. You have the opportunity to do this. Please, as Robin Williams said in that great movie Dead Poets Society, to those students he so believed in, carpe diem, seize the day. I believe in you and I have a lot of hope in you. Okay? Thank you. So I'd like to open it up to questions, please. You can see I'm very passionate about this, and I would love to take any questions you might have. Way back there, yes? I'm sorry.
What do you think about the conflict of basic value between two cultures?
Basic what? I'm sorry?
Conflicts of basic value opinions.
Basic values or opinions? You see them all over. One of the things I believe in, respect for those. Instead of saying conflict between, I would say, yes, you know that there's conflict between, but think about Martin Luther King, a big believer in civil disobedience, okay? He also said, you know, sometimes if we are of different backgrounds, different skin color, different culture, different languages, we must agree to disagree. So what I often see on college campuses is faculty members, administrators will get in correction mode and say, what you're saying isn't right. So what I would say to you is, always agree to disagree in terms of differences and try and communicate effectively so that others are learning about you and you're learning about them as well. Does that answer your question?
What if the culture disagree about agreeing to disagree?
The culture in general, are you saying? Or are you saying going into faculty meetings, for example?
Close-minded, they don't even want to open to other culture.
Are you saying, in terms of being closed-minded, are you saying everyone or a small minority?
Major value, mainstream.
Mainstream. Well, then what I would recommend is somehow working on a form of communication where you summarize this problem, and instead of simply throwing it to the wind and speaking, which is what a lot of people do, you actually walk in and diplomatically confront the problem with others who are involved. Having an open door, moving in, working on it, as opposed to, and this is what a lot of academic institutions deal with, just screaming about it but not doing anything about it. You have to be able to confront conflict, and my biggest suggestion here, have students work with you on it. It's all grassroots. Any sort of change is grassroots. You must not just stand there and complain about things. People have to be more than squeaky wheels. They have got to confront these issues as groups and move in to elicit change. Change is not easy. Change is not quick. But when you're dealing with issues like you see on campus, you have got to start to deal with them quickly. And remember I said, simplify with the triangle, 6 sides and 3 issues. That may change over time, but at least you're getting people from different groups to sit down and talk about it. That in and of itself is valuable. Okay? You can see how passionate I am about this. You also, are you an educator here? Yeah. What you also want to do is try and create yourself the eye of the hurricane. You know that in academia there can also be, or often be, hurricanes. You want to try and create that peaceful eye in the middle, which is absolutely beautiful, so that you get those ideas rushing around you and you're able to, with multiple groups in conflict, as the eye or the axis in the middle of the globe, move the process forward as it's spinning. Yes, there will be friction. You can't fear that. You've got to, and this is another line I often say, feel the fear and do it anyway. Okay? My apologies for the passion. You can see I'm a very outspoken radical. Thank you. Others? Would love to hear from students.
It's me again.
Hi again. I appreciate what you're saying.
I have a question. As we all know, there's a tragedy that happened a few days ago in Paris, along with other countries around the world. Me as a Muslim, I saw a lot of social networks and all that, people coming down on the religion of Islam,
Right.
which shows that, a bad apple pretty much ruined the whole batch. So I want to know, how could we, or me as myself, as a Muslim, go by showing people these people that we do not even acknowledge at all.
I know exactly what you're saying.
Okay.
Imagine this. You get students together in that role play scenario I told you about. So I come in with a case study on Rwanda, for example, and students who are experiencing friction, you do not start by focusing on that issue. That could be a bomb. That could be a stick of dynamite. You start by placing students in the 6 roles in another conflict, like Rwanda, connecting with President Kagame, etc. Do you know what you discover there? Boy, you can really come together and do some amazing things in terms of problem solving and conflict resolution. And then you do that again as a simulation exercise, getting closer and closer to the conflict you're talking about. So you're looking at each other differently, saying, wow, as a team, we can really deal with conflict well. We can confront conflict. But that's an exercise that you do. Another thing Outward Bound and National Outdoor Leadership School are two organizations that teach good leadership skills. I have hundreds of icebreaker and team building exercises where you're forced to come together and deal with issues together that are actually fun. So you're getting to know one another in other ways. And I also teach that word listen, spelled another way is silent. I did an exercise this morning with students where I said, please stand up and get in a line. If your birthday is January 1st, no year, you're right here. December 31st, you're in the back. And you can't say anything. You've got to give hand signals. What you start to learn is the importance of body language. And you start to learn, wow, people have birthdays very close to mine. And in the United States, we say 1-2 for January 1st. Actually, in Europe, 1-2 means the 1st of February. So you're starting to learn cultural differences as well. And that's just one exercise that's fun before you then get into the conflict resolution work as different sides. And imagine students you might not necessarily get along with. You're forced to be at those tables with them representing the same side. But again, you start far away before getting close. It works like a charm. I've been doing this for over 30 years. That's the fun part about it. Okay? Others? Other questions? Please, anyone? Yes?
I'm an international student from India, and whatever you said, it has been the same way that I have been for 2 years, and I felt the cultural shock to explain, and I walked in other shoes, I learned different things, and if you ask me perspectives about why it changed from the time I came here for this period, and when I see other students, I know if I have a friend, I can influence them, but there are a group of students, and it's really difficult for international students to get out of their comfort zone and go and experience new things. And do you have any ideas to make a group setting where we can influence other people, other than just word of mouth and learning?
Do you mean on campus?
On campus or in
Bringing groups together? Well, there's one great way on a college campus. It's called a party. I knew people would chuckle on that one. A party. Set up some sort of a party which has a cultural theme to it. And even if it's something that students just stop by, and faculty members just stop by, you've got the music going, so it's this sense, one of 5 senses. You've got the food, so it's new tastes. It's just new smells. It's paying respect by creating an environment where you've got students coming together. You can do that, and you've got to be creative with it. But that's what the university will support, because you're starting to teach your peers about other places. And then the other thing I would suggest is imagine you. Where are you from originally? What part? Okay, imagine you getting together with faculty members to set up a trip for students or faculty members or both, so you are now the host on your own turf. Using students who are here to host so they learn how to be better hosts, which is what the Americans are doing here, and the cultural differences and the cultural problems start to come down. The walls start to fall. So you start it here, and you move it overseas. And you can't go to every place around the world. It's too expensive. But imagine strategic spots where you can actually be the host this time, as opposed to being a guest in another cultural society. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, one more question? I guess the only other question, if I had to ask you, rapid fire. First, what would those 3 core issues in the middle of that pyramid be? As I work on a case study, 3 core issues. Does anyone have an idea of those issues that you are dealing with to bridge linguistic and cultural differences more effectively? Sorry? Security? You sensed that one with all my case studies, didn't you? Security, life or death, is the core issue. And a lot of people don't understand security. You're absolutely right. Very good. You should be a student in my seminar at Boston University. Second issue. Thank you for volunteering.
I think so. Communicating without any fear.
Communicating without what?
Without any fear.
Very good. Open communication. As I often say, I was mentioning this to a group before, communication is an important vitamin C to prevent the cancer of conflict more effectively. Communication, comprehension, compromise, compassion, coexistence, creativity, those are all C words that lead to a better prevention of the cancer, another C word, of conflict. And that's why there is more hope. Yes?
Economics debate.
You're getting the core. Very good. And imagine politics being between administrators and faculty members, etc. Security, politics, economics. Boom, boom, boom. That's 3 core issues we use around the world. You guys are really picking this up fast. This is cool. Thank you for doing, and thank you for saying that, and thank you for saying that. See, faculty members, that's what you've got here. You've got these students you can interact with and learn such great things from if you do it together. If you do it together. Okay? It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much, everyone.
I'd like to thank Mr. Hobert for his presentation today. I also want to introduce our Associate Vice President for International Affairs, Stephen Foster. He'll present a gift. And before I forget, I keep forgetting, there is food there, and we'll have Mr. Hobert here for a few more minutes. So please take advantage at the end of this event. There's some nice treats there for you, and let's engage in some conversation. Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you all for coming during this busy time of the semester, and it certainly was a very stimulating and engaging presentation, and also follow up with the questions. And I just want to thank Professor Hobert for coming and sharing his very exciting approach to managing conflict. Certainly there's no lack of it, and so the resolution opportunities to resolve that, it's wonderful to hear these. So thank you, Professor, and for you.
I really appreciate that. Oh, thank you very much. It's very noble of the university. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you again, and enjoy the